Hello, everybody. My name is Kevin Kotchek. I'm the founder CEO of Chemical Q Device. So this is event seminar 124, and this is for FDA Good Machine Learning Practice Guidelines. I'll go over the 10 of them and a bunch of approvals that meet those. They all have to meet, but I'll pick out the specific of the 10s. And then practical quantum-inspired machine learning. So I'll be going over, what is safe, accurate, explainable, effective, scalable, and fast, and then everything that we see just coming through with quantum-inspired in the form of tensor networks, dequantized algorithms, and different software techniques with this. So here's the outline so the FDA approvals, and I'm going to focus on 3 of the 10. A lot of them have to do with the data sets, which is kind of more universal to all technology of these 10. And, the human AI team testing demonstrates device performance during clinically relevant conditions. And then I'll kind of give like an analogy of what's going on in quantum inspired as what could be used to assist future AI with tensor networks or dequantized algorithms, those types of things. So rough explanation of quantum inspired 2.0 is basically these techniques, approximation techniques that to do quantum inspired techniques that are efficient and effective on classical computers, such as GPUs and CPUs or TPUs. So here's the list of the 10. So they call it the GMLP. It's somewhat synonymous to CGMP if you've ever worked in regulatory areas and industry. It's a guideline. It's not exactly a law, per se, but it's very good to follow these. And I would say most of the, if not all of the, recent approvals and going back a while, follow these. Good software engineering, human AI team, and then clinically relevant conditions. It's abiding by these things. So what we see is good software engineering. So all of these are from the October 2023 FDA website. And most of them are radiology, but not all. And say, for instance, for good software engineering, you'll see more automation. So for the spine auto views by GE Medical Systems, July 13, 2023, automatically generates spine reformats versus predicate, meaning the previous substantially equivalent device with more manual, that had more manual interactions, meaning more automatic. And then they're able to get, different percents better. So that they say in this case, user acceptable results. So meaning like the physicians or, technicians that are using it greater than 95% of the time. It's not a foolproof thing. It's just that AI gets us to a place that's in many cases a lot better than what humans could do, either because it would take too much time, or, we have the compute power to look at a bunch of things to train off of. And when we see unseen data, we can get a lot better results based on the sheer compute of, that we're seeing with GPUs these days. So here's another one, subtle medical, this one in radiology. And again, these are from 2023. And then this is switching from Tensor Keras to PyTorch. I'm not going to say what's best, but I've had experience in both of them. And they're 2 different frameworks that both have, their benefits. So in this specific iteration of this 510K, these are all 510Ks, meaning that they have a predicate device. It's not a de novo or a PMA that, it has something that's very similar, and it's improving the performance without changing the intended use, is how they put it with this. So it's effectively software enhanced MR images via reduction of noise or sharpness enhancement. So, and for those just coming in here, this is kind of an overview of a bunch of the more recent FDA approvals, and it really helps. And it's basically the only way really to learn, besides interacting directly with FDA or the experts around there, lawyers, these types of things. They know it very well, is to read a bunch of these, go through these, and especially if you want to, and someday incorporate some emerging technology that could help improve the current ones, or maybe even be considered, part of a replacement. And then the last one here on this first page is Siemens Healthcare. So you'll see that the mean number of false positives per subject is significantly lower using a new mode. So these all I grouped together, and it uses a convolutional neural network under good software engineering. So again, they don't always go through 1 through 10 and of a new approval and say this, 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 and this. You have to find them. And a lot of times it's not necessary because of the pre-existing or the predicate device has it. So you'll learn a lot going through the previous ones. And I would say the companies that have been around longer, they tend to be the shortest ones. So here's another one. So the focus is placed on human AI teams. So this could mean many things, but I think in specifically, what is the benefit of the human here? What is the benefit of the AI? Other people refer this to as like, can we use just sheer, is AI needed at all in this case? So if you go to the doctor's office and they say, well, we didn't use AI at all, and it's, you have another surgery plan, it's like, well, you could have, you know, but they just haven't got there yet. So basically what we see in this, the human AI team, so we see the words, clinicians reviewed lung ultrasounds. It's very rare that you have medical devices that have full, carte blanche over everything. And, and effectively we're giving, the computers a level of authority. And that's what the approval is based on. Like it can't go outside of its intended use. So things that are very risky, should have some level of human review to it. So on to the next one here with Genius AI detection from Hologic is we see it's a device to aid in the interpretation of digital breast tomosynthesis exams by physicians. So you start to see this incorporation. We're not giving the computers, full access in most cases because humans have to run them anyway. But, there's usually some level of, checks and balances that go with this. And this other one is very familiar to a lot of us. So this is Apple's IRNF, or irregular rhythm notification feature. It's all software based. It communicates with the, it's inside the watch. Basically the software. It communicates with the phone as well. So it's software only, mobile application, provides, and it's a developing thing. They had the de novo, meaning the first one or from scratch. And then they've had, I think, 2 or 3 other 510Ks before this. And this one also uses a convolutional neural network. So it's a very standard thing to use a CNN, or, is the abbreviation for it. And not all of them use these continuously updating algorithms. So meaning like, say in 6 months, they have a bunch of new data. In this specific case, the algorithm is locked, so they already did their training. They're happy with the results, or there's some legal liability. And again, this is just for educational purpose. This is all public. There's not an intent and a big enough incentive to make this get trained again. And then all of a sudden people are getting better results 6 months later. There might just be a subsequent, 510K in a year or two, those types of things. And this is the last page as far as the FDA approvals. And this is, basically addressing clinically relevant conditions. So we see a lot of these times they're in hospitals. So this first one it's Samsung, and it's in, between South Korea, which is their headquarters, and then America, their hospitals. So you'll see all of this goes on. Deep learning view algorithm validated on fetal heart biometry images at 2 hospitals. Okay. And same thing with deep learning segmentation. So you'll always see that typically, like I said, unless it has very substantial predicate devices that have done the clinical research. If it's something newer, and especially if they're trying to introduce something that, you have to prove the performance, but you still want it to be substantially equivalent. And you're trying to avoid a brand new, like a de novo, where the 510Ks that's typically the approach, is find something that already exists and then try to have it qualify as it being like having a predicate. Here's another one by Fujifilm Healthcare, clinical image evaluation, equal or better than conventional images. And a lot of times, like, it just depends on the approval as far as how much information that they give you, as far as results, percentages. Studies can go from like hundreds of people to over 1,000, these types of things. So you typically don't see huge studies that's in that, because there could be other issues with that. Cranial navigation software by BrainLab AG. And so this last one in specific, clinically relevant conditions, is a realistic clinical setup utilizing 2 software features, fulfill this criteria. And here's another one that uses a CNN, a convolutional neural network. So CNNs have been around for a while. They're reliable, they're trustworthy. And the next section here is basically going over, and we'll make the bond or the connection between some of these quantum inspired and CNNs, and actually it's quite strong. So this next section here is all the quantum inspired stuff. So I want to make sure everybody understands this is basically quantum inspired is we're borrowing and we're taking whatever is beneficial that we're learning from quantum algorithms, quantum systems, and using it in a approximate manner on classical hardware that can be, scaled up more easily, getting better results. And that's what happened in this first one. And this is probably, it's proprietary, so they didn't include the exact tensor network being used. Now, a tensor network is analogous to CNNs. They've been around for a while, so it's just the performance, and especially in 2024 with this and other ones are really picking up, and the incentive to use this. Now, they function differently. So they're not like deep learning where, it can do end-to-end, image analysis. But in this specific case, an example for this or a use case would be shrinking Llama 2, a 7 billion model, to 30% of its size, twice as fast, and approximately 90% of original accuracy. This would be something that would be shrunk down potentially to a phone. So that's the whole goal, is as parameters go up, and they say we need, I think ChatGPT is trillions of parameters, but that, I think GPT-3 was something like $100 million to train, like very, very expensive. So anyways, the goal is to get high performing models down to the size of phones. And, there's different ways of doing that. Conventionally, you would use distillation or pruning, self-attention, those types of things. But the thing with quantum inspired with tensor networks in this case is it's called model correlation space. So it's a different way of going about it. It's quantum inspired. I believe this also ties in with Hilbert space, if you've heard Hilbert space. But again, we're only taking the quantum part that's very beneficial to use on classical models. And then sometimes they'll say we're only using a partial amount of the Hilbert space instead of the whole amount, which is exponentially RAM consuming, and a lot of it doesn't actually correlate to performance. Okay, so I think we're going to see this trend. This is the multiverse. There's other affiliations with that, but that was the #1 author on the paper. And it's very encouraging to see because they use words like democratization of, artificial intelligence. So meaning shrinking models down significantly. And they actually called it extreme compression. So tensor networks more synonymous with compression, as far as the approximation methods that are being used here. So the second one is very famous paper. It's by Ewan Tang. She's a researcher at University of Washington, and it was the paper that the quantum machine learning researchers that were intending to use their quantum algorithms in 10 years or however long it would take to get a quantum computer. And that never happened, and there's so many issues in it. So anyways, it's looking at on the algorithmic basis. So there's already been about at least 8 quantum machine learning algorithms that have been dequantized. So meaning there's no exponential speed up for them on a future quantum computer. And, it turned a lot of eyebrows, I would say, because, you have John Preskill, you have Seth Lloyd, and obviously Richard Feynman, influencing this industry too. And, some of those having a very significant number of quantum algorithms that they built up. So that's been the primary focus for dequantized algorithms by Ewan Tang and others. But as far as it crossing over into being better than machine learning techniques, that's still to be done, because the main focus is just to keep getting faster and faster dequantized algorithms to the point that there's hardly any benefit. So where it stands today with quantum algorithms on quantum computers, there's still some that are super polynomially faster than the dequantized algorithms or the best classical. There's some that are quadratically faster or polynomially, but the huge incentive, what was believed, is to run these with exponential speed up. And that appears to be shrinking as more and more of these papers coming out. Now, this last one is an NVIDIA cuTensorNet. They've also had different publications going to, they say, tens of thousands of qubits being simulated. So the thing with all of this quantum research that was intended for quantum computers is now we have all of this information, we have all this research, and now we could use it in a very practical and efficient method using tensor networks on GPUs or even CPUs. So NVIDIA is one of the leaders behind it. And in fact, they have cuTensorNet, and they've done a lot of this preliminary work to say, like, we can go up to, so many qubits. And this was thought to be basically impossible, in any type of simulation above like 40 or 50 for state vector. And then tensor network, it's going like, because of the hardware and the software, our understanding is going very high. So this next one is basically this human AI team. So we're seeing things from, prior researchers on symmetries. And the first one, this number one up here, is between, is NSF funded with MIT researchers and Harvard in 2023. And it's using an autoregressive neural network and a tensor network to outperform either of the two. So like I said, it's a good paper. I didn't see anything that was just like, okay, we need to drop everything kind of thing. But these organizations, will likely come better back with better research too. Now, the second one is another one, because this is basically putting everything on classical advantage is the term that they use, using a supercomputer. And they say it has far-reaching impact in solving quantum many-body problems and statistical problems. So tensor networks themselves, because of all this quantum research done, for future quantum computers, has benefited because now there's all of these potential applications lined up that we can start using a lot of them on, tensor networks. Now, this last one is another dequantized algorithm, and it's basically saying these scholars, match the time dependence of a quantum algorithm with a classical algorithm, which is rarer. Usually, if you're sketching or trying to approximate a quantum algorithm, you're going to lose some off the time complexity, but this one said it kept it. So you're going to see a lot more of that, I think, getting closer and closing the quantum classical gap. So this third slide in this series is basically, preliminarily relevant conditions. So this first paper is basically a tensor network. I previously reviewed this one, but it's one of those ones you see in the headlines. So it's the NYU Flatiron Institute this year. And again, like early this year, especially for tensor networks, we're seeing the results. So they're saying much more accurate and precise than quantum computer or any other classical network before. And it's for studying future complex systems corresponding to an infinite number of qubits. That's typically associated with you don't go exponential in runtime and RAM, and you're able to use these quantum systems and circuits that everybody say, this would be awesome if only we could run it. So you have to run it on approximation on classical hardware, but it's the speed of innovation that will make this field, I believe, by the end of this year, hands down, the preferred method to do quantum machine learning with a quantum computing method. It'll just go so much faster than anything in hardware, as far as like the noise issues, decoherence, latency. You have to run many shots, and they're only available to the select few, and they're expensive. So it's the speed of innovation that we're seeing right now in tensor networks and even dequantized algorithms or even software techniques to do quantum inspired, because we can get to the solutions, even if we have to do some approximation to make it CPU or GPU friendly. So this next one here is basically fastest class simulation. This is another iTurner. So this is actually IBM and IonQ, and they're the leading quantum computing results. And I think it was December 2023 was Harvard and QEra. It was a 48 qubit circuit on a quantum computer. It ran at like 0.3 seconds, which is pretty good, but it took 3 days to correct the error. So that's another thing. If you want to do anything that's of importance, you're going to have to add that on. And I think it's partial error correction. I don't think there's anything that's corrects all the error. So anyways, 100 times faster for a 48 qubit on a noise-free simulator. And then on top of that, they scaled it to 96 qubits, and it was still like 4 seconds. And this has no noise whatsoever. I was always told you can't go above anything above 50. So they found this way of reducing entanglement gates, CNOT gates, into a very efficient ways. And then they went to 4x, so that's 192. That one took some compute. So that took about, what it would take to train an average deep learning neural network, like 4 days, 5,000 CPU, TPU combo, that type of thing. But that paper basically buys them some time. But I don't think, with the pace of innovation that we're seeing right now with tensor nets, especially NVIDIA's paved the way, like we can do this. We're going to see, in my opinion, some very good papers coming out in quantum inspired. And like I said, by the end of the year, I think this will be the default standard going into the future for quantum inspired and machine learning. And this last one is another key paper. So it's called the quantum singular value transform algorithm. This grand unification has already been dequantized, meaning there's basically a small polynomially benefit of a quantum algorithm if it were to run on a quantum computer in like 10 years. So those are all really important. Now, I want to make the connections. Are there any questions at this point? So are there any questions regarding any of the FDA approvals or any of these, 2023, 2024 quantum inspired papers? And feel free to put it in the chat, and then we'll have time afterwards too to go over this too. So here we are at convolutional neural networks. Yes, transformers exist. And no, I don't know the prevalence because only some of them mention convolutional neural networks. Now, the FDA themselves have put up a web guide to convolutional neural networks, and they'll only accept, medical devices that are proven to be safe and effective. Now, the thing with so if you have like a convolutional neural network, we're strictly talking AI right now. Or if you have a transformer, and again, that's probably in the pipeline to come through, is these do kind of the end-to-end of image analysis, right? So you're going to have, hundreds or thousands, probably thousands of medical images that you train on the model. And then that model at that specific time will be fixed. And then you introduce unseen data, and that's called inferencing. And then you have the option to negotiate, whether you want to have a continuously updating algorithm, which means that, in a couple months you come back. I guess in theory, it can update daily, these types of things, but the approvals that I've seen have either been locked, or it'd be probably that situation where you come back and then you would train based on, a new training set, or you had to issue or you had to deal with a bias in your system. So they're highly efficient, accurate to distinguish these textural features. Now, like with everything, classical computers cannot do everything. It's the same thing if you were to try to differentiate, instead of you want to use exact, differentiation methods or even annealing, but typically you use, steps or, optimizers, right? That are approximate by nature. And the convolutional layers or the filters produce new images. So what's shown up here, which serves as inputs for the next. And this goes to smaller layers of increased number of channels. And this has been proven just to work. So when you're training images, you're effectively, you're learning, and you can get better, right? Because the parameters get updated. Now, the other assumptions are translational invariance, local receptive fields, or weight sharing. So these are all things that are done to make the model much better. So when you see new images, then the accuracy is higher than any human can do. And at this stage of the game, we don't have infinite compute, and it's just the approximations that are needed in order for this to go to, produce high accuracy, low loss. And then you have pooling. So pooling is typically associated with downsampling, more so than compression. And it's doing this along the spatial dimensionality of this given input, and it reduces the amount of data for analysis. So we're talking like sheer, if you've ever run deep learning, a huge thing is the number of images, so it reduces the amount of data for analysis, storage, or processing. And you can use compression alongside CNNs, to reduce resources in memory. And that's more like the tensor network that I was talking about. So again, these are industry accepted, federal government accepted approach of doing image analysis. And again, the other big one is transformers, and this is strictly AI. And I haven't seen much of anything, in because just very rarely where they mention, and sometimes you have to go back, but you're probably usually going back to convolutional neural networks for image analysis, i.e., radiology approvals for FDA. So the exciting thing is definitely these tensor networks. Like I said, these are not new, and I've got a good quote at the end of this presentation that ties all of this together. So there's actually a specific tree tensor network that corresponds to existing convolutional neural networks. And they're typically associated as having a complementary set of tools for interpretability, which is always a goal for convolutional neural networks or transformers, and efficient representation of complex systems, or these could be quantum systems, something that you're trying to do as close to possible that's already in nature. And we're talking structured data processing it's better at than unstructured. So convolutional neural networks, unstructured, and this is more like graphs, grids, or sequences, long range correlations, quantum physics simulation, and you'll hear this like many body systems, these types of things. I don't know if we've crossed into, I've watched a number of these seminars, but sometimes looking at things few body is typically the initial approach, points and only looking at the closer points instead of everything. And quantum states and operators associated with more quantum circuits. And you also have combinatorial optimizations, low rank approximations of high dimensional data. So you see there's these benefits, some with the convolutional neural network, and then some also with the tensor networks. Now, neural networks excel in unstructured data, that it's actually not good to have structured data, larger scale data sets, and end-to-end learning. So you kind of see how these fit together as far as using this potentially in the future of improving CNNs or transformers, just because tensor networks, that by nature are quantum inspired, and they're just different. So I think the takeaway, there's already medical devices out there for end-to-end for convolutional neural networks, and for tensor networks, maybe a little bit more on the supporting side, at least to begin with, is what I'm seeing, or even hybrids in the future. That's a possibility. So they work by reducing complexity by decomposing or compressing large tensors into smaller tensors, networks of smaller ranks. So figure, if you know tensors in mathematics, figure many tensors, i.e. tensor networks. And there's all types. There's matrix product state. This one above is tree tensor network. That was in a recent paper. There's PEPs. I think it's projected entanglement something states. And, there's hybrids and all these types of things. Now, again, so with this third slide here in this sequence is basically, this is for dequantized algorithms. So 8 of and they go on, this is recommendation systems. So this shows the time complexity on the left of the quantum algorithm. And it's been removed to this exponential speed up because this algorithm here, I think, is within polynomial speed. So in other words, we all know that, if there were a quantum computer in the future, it would be fast, or I'm sorry, it would be limited, to, time or in specific economics and the number of people that could get to it. So unless an exponentially faster, quantum algorithm would in the future, if the data set is tolerant to noise, the quantum noise, that would be an option. But like I say, by the end of the year, because of all this research coming out and it getting faster, and actually this algorithm on the right is the prior, and they're already doing significant improvements over the previous dequantized algorithms to remove this thing. So the issue right now is it's all based on speed. Time complexity is what everybody's going after. And say, for instance, there were a bunch of quantum machine learning algorithms, by Seth Lloyd, I think John Preskel, and many others. And what she did, and she showed in her dissertation at University of Washington, is there's basically, there's very little incentive to run them on a quantum computer because her or other researchers proved that there's no exponential speed up. So in many cases, there is some, but it's not enough to justify, even in the future, of running something just a little bit faster, or even, quadratically, super polynomially. I think it's better. But anyways, there was all these hopes for quantum machine learning, and then this kind of put it into the perspective of what can be done on classical computers. And like I said, many leading quantum algorithms now lack incentive to run on a future computer and a quantum computer. And, at least 8 of these dequantized, and there are several of the high dimensional problems haven't been successfully dequantized now. So it is still a developing field. But I think the thing that you're seeing in literature is it's just like, we did this and it was significantly better than our one before. And our one before already dequantized, meaning it removed the exponential speed up. So it's things to think on top of that. Like if you're a pure researcher and you love to run things natively, like a native quantum computer on a native hardware, it might be a thing for you. But I think the thing in medical is it has to be safe and effective. It has to process patient data without noise or decoherence. And, you're going to have to run a bunch of times, so you can't keep taking many shots. So there are some, drawbacks with the dequantized algorithms. The main thing is that they're not really focusing on the machine learning practicality as much as dequantizing all the quantum algorithms that are out there, or that's the goal. Now, they're on the mathematics side, they're actually weaker commute parameters versus classical randomized linear algebra. So I think this is what you'd see more so in just traditional machine learning, and tailored to solve tasks that deviate from conventional machine learning, meaning that there's sometimes a rank restriction to it, or sparsity, these types of things, and that they're not quite as universal as we'd want them to be to use in practical applications. So the main thing with this field is the speed, getting that speed up versus the others. So what was covered this week is basically we saw the good machine learning practice guiding principles, basically 9 different examples of that, from software engineering, human AI team, clinically relevant conditions. And the big thing with practical quantum-inspired machine learning 2.0, meaning so these are approximates that are efficient and effective to run on classical hardware, tensor networks. So I would highly suggest, another paper came out just today. It was Terra Quantum AG, and they did another of these compressions that was done by Multiverse a couple weeks ago, I believe. And, theirs was basically, they compressed it by 50%. And it seemed a little bit better than using other pure classical techniques. So you're just going to see that. But the more papers in general, the better. And, it's good to see kind of the distinguishing, performance versus quantum inspired versus other techniques, with Multiverse kind of leading the way, I think, in compression. Now, NVIDIA cuTensorNet, and again, they have many studies with tensor networks. And I think I was in one of the more recent kind of their national presentations on YouTube, and they said that they've gotten up to tens of thousands of qubits. Now, the reason why this is important is not only for quantum circuits, but is for quantum systems and all of this quantum information science. And I'm getting to the quote at the end of it to show you the practical use of using tensor networks that have been revived from its past. And dequantized algorithms limit quantum algorithm utility on future quantum computers. Software techniques, so like I said, the IBM and IonQ paper, they're doing this on noiseless simulations. It buys them some time, for their own future hardware, releases. And it kind of says that the Harvard Q-era paper is not nearly as good as what they thought, because we could do this noiseless and we could do it 100 times faster, and we'll scale it up twice, and then we'll double that again, or 4x from the original. And, tensor networks were shown to correspond to existing convolutional networks. So there's similarities, and I think compatibility, obviously, in the future. And obviously, when you're talking about explainability, interpretability, that's one of the things that tensor networks, and as they're continuing to work better and get better results, interpretability, efficient representations of complex systems, So meaning that can the doctor reproduce the results that were, done by a computer if they had the compute or, the human compute to do it. And they're also advantageous for structured data, physics simulations, and combinatorial problems. So welcome to tensor networks. Now, all this falls under the Hoyt et al. Paper. This is late 2023. And what we see left, everything is done classically. So classical data generating, meaning classical data, classical processing, meaning CPUs and GPUs. So there's other papers that have come before this that have kind of thrown CQ in different directions, but it's 100% classical. It's inspired by quantum mechanics. Like we take these principles that have been learned these past couple of years. This is the stuff we really want to run well, and now it's for tensor networks. So the first two I covered pretty well. Dequantize out. Here's the 8 that have been dequantized. So support vector machines, QSVT right here. Tensor networks, I've mentioned most of these. The MPO is matrix product operator. Quantum variational algorithm simulation, in my opinion, will not last unless it makes more approximations that are CPU friendly. So I've seen papers that are trying to use a tensor network for the embedding to embed classical into quantum states. But that whole thing was so slow in all these papers, and I did it too. And, it's about trying to get it to run, efficiently classically. So keep the classical data, but get inspired by the quantum instead of doing all of this pure, trying to do this purely like a quantum computer would. That was QiML 1.0. And there's other methods too. So here's the big quotes that I've been getting to. So this is by R. Orris in Nature Reviews Physics, and this is in 2019. So it shows that, 2024, this is good that this was said there. Originally developed in the context of condensed matter physics and based on renormalization group ideas, tensor networks lived a revival thanks to quantum information theory, a lot of the stuff I've been talking about, and the understanding of entanglement in quantum many-body systems. So like, quantum systems. Now, there's another good one. This is from A. Tumot at Multiverse, the big paper, the compression paper. Tensor networks have been shown to provide a much more refined, controllable, and explainable compression technique of LLMs, like potentially for smartphones, getting really, really small, compared to alternative methods such as pruning, distillation, quantization, and low rank approximations. All that is the traditional stuff that's been done to try to compress models. And that's obviously this year. And then the last one, this is the Ewan Tang, so this is dequantized algorithms. The existence of a dequantized algorithm means that its quantum counterpart cannot give exponential speedups on classical data, illuminating the landscape of QML speedups. So the whole field of QML is not in a good shape right now because of this, because a lot of these can be run practically efficiently on classical hardware. And that's the main thing with that. And I think, so here's the references here. And I saw, at least one other person come in a little bit later. Are there any questions? And feel free to put it in the chat. And it's definitely the type of thing I think, you're going to be hearing in medical space of using tensor networks more. It's going to take a little bit longer, I think, for the dequantized algorithms. And other software techniques like circuit cutting or qubit reuse, mid-circuit measurement that they've been trying to use on hardware, that'll help just regular plain old quantum algorithms. But again, I think the more that we get away from the strict notion of having to use this specific gate combination in quantum algorithms and more into the quantum-inspired approximation to get the most effective aspect from quantum-inspired and implement only that, I think the closer we are to talking about quantum-inspired machine learning 2.0 just being the primary, benefit for quantum computing, even, but I think at least by the end of the year, it'll kind of take that rank because all this will kind of filter down and the papers keep coming. And, basically tensor networks are a lot more figured out now. So like I said, feel free to put it in the chat. And then, if you're new, and you could ask any elementary question, it's fine. So what was covered was FDA stuff. And then all of these quantum inspired papers, and then that connection between, the compatibility between tensor networks and convolutional neural networks. And this has been going on for some years, which is good, but now we're starting to see the results, the benefits of it. So yeah, feel free to ask any questions. And it's definitely the type of field that's just like, I mean, for me, it's like I finally found something that was like high performance, faster, it's emerging. It can still use a lot of development, and especially getting into something that would help a future FDA approved medical device. But it has, background, with tensor networks, which is good. And also, so if you're coming from your own fields too, think of anything, that you're working on that's related to something that quantum inspired could help. And I think the huge issue is it just developed a reputation of being extremely slow and above average results. And you could get better results, but by the time it took to get to that point, you could run some other classical algorithm for longer to get there. So again, it all comes down to results as opposed to running things like how you would on a quantum computer, but instead think like Hilbert space, only using the part that you need to, all the benefits of tensor networks. And now there's been a lot of dequantized algorithms. Okay, so we have a question in the chat. So how do you see the tensor networks in the future? How about its compatibility in quantum computers, maybe versus transformers? Yeah, so I see tensor networks mostly excelling in classical compute. And it's the pace of innovation. And I don't think there's going to be many people in quantum hardware that can argue with the pace of innovation. Yeah, you'll probably get some quantum computer, 7 to 10 years that can do a big problem, but it's still going to have some noise. But it solves the big problem, but it can't do it in like a continuously updating machine learning workflow. So that's what I see, because I mentioned in these slides, you have complex systems, you have quantum systems that people have been wanting to run somehow, and this appears to be the primary method of doing it. So I just watching other presentations and the development over it, say over the last 10 years, there was a Simons Institute, which is Berkeley, talk on this, and he goes through all the the pros and the cons, and I've just heard it from enough people, and now I've researching it heavily. Yeah, so about its compatibility in quantum computers. So they're using it to try to understand quantum noise, to use it in that specific application. So I mean, anything on the hardware side for quantum computers, you can't do much without a classical computer, and that's anything from optimizing parameters as the neural network trains, these types of things, and especially with this. So tensor networks are used all over the place. It's not just for one specific thing. Although I've mentioned many, they are being used in other areas of quantum computing for different kind of objectives. I mean, if that's the path you want to go, but like I said, I think it's just the speed of this, will outstrip anything the other computing methods can do, quantum hardware. And then, so, I mean, the big thing with this is that my understanding is that you're typically not running a tensor network on its own in the same way as a CNN or a transformer. But as I showed before, they've been, compared to convolutional neural networks. So I see hybrids coming, using a model that has both aspects, because on one end you have deep learning benefits, on the other end you have tensor network benefits. And I'm pretty sure you could probably find some literature on that too, is hybrid. Now, the other thing is just doing everything in deep learning, having the model and then compressing it with a tensor network. And we've seen that a couple times, and I talked about Terra Quantum AG in this presentation today. They just had another paper on that. And they've talked about democratization of LLMs, meaning that having these models on your phone, is the implied intention for them. So, like I said, I think we're going to see a lot of papers, especially tensor networks come through the pipeline. And a lot of people are going to hold on to using their, pure quantum algorithm, trying to do it on classical hardware. And I would try to stay away from that. But learn from the quantum inspired nature of what's causing what would be the end result of that quantum algorithm, either dequantize the whole thing, to have it in pure classical, like it's a classical algorithm that was derived from a quantum one. But I think there's a lot of people that'll try to do that, and it's skirting the lines between what's quantum inspired machine learning 1.0 and what's 2.0. So 2.0 would be dequantized algorithms because you're making approximations from quantum algorithms to run classically, or tensor networks as you're doing quantum inspired techniques that are efficient classically. So I know you can get by if you try to run like a high entangled qubit circuit. That's harder with tensor networks, but it's an approximate method in order to get to the big. We're talking like big data, big problems, these types of things, as opposed to trying to keep the purity of quantum circuits. So I think that's where the biggest gains will be, and I think that we've already seen that already in 2024. But the two kind of like, if you're trying to do things like I've done the Penny Lane demos and the Qiskit demos, if you're trying to do everything like it like how you're trying to run it on a quantum computer, well, that was not meant for a classical computer. And we all know it's slow. You go exponential in RAM with qubits, and gates isn't much better, we're going deeper. So as a researcher, I would strive to understand the technique. Is this going to be efficient? Is this going to be producing good results? The applications, like they've done it a couple of times at least of, better results compressing large language models. So I would go that, like, if you're a researcher, and this is for everybody in the recording too, is think about, what's going to last in the long run. And are you going to get the performance? Are you going to get accuracy? Those types of things. But if it starts off, and hopefully I saved you some time today, and if it starts off where it's just not efficient algorithm to be running, it's not efficient to take classical images, convert them into quantum states, and then back into a measurement. That's not an efficient process for a classical computer to do. But if you could take that whole block and say, for instance, dequantize it or break it down into something that's efficient classically, then you're more in the lines, right? But I think the hardest thing for people in this transition will be, it's not like how we ran everything on the 26, there's probably more by now, Penny Lane demos, right? A lot of those, and there's quantum transfer learning and this type of stuff. That wasn't optimized for a classical computer. That was to play around if a quantum computer came. So, I think you have to learn the basics of tensor networks. That's the key. Quantum inspired machine learning is basically give us a heads up, and I think like a premonition even, that the route that we're on with tensor networks is correct, because these quantum algorithms, many of them don't have exponential speed up anymore. So you're going to hear a lot in the news, and as far as hardware pushing. And if you don't believe the other stuff, like if you believe that there's not going to be much decoherence and noise, and running a bunch of shots isn't an issue, and only a select few people can run them, if you choose to go that route, I think it's kind of dangerous, and I mean, you just have to look at the papers, look at the literature. And if but you have to believe that these have been dequantized, so there's not much incentive to go on, right? And QSVT was a huge, that was like the grand unification of quantum algorithms, and now it has like a polynomial speed up. So yeah, I mean, it's just, it'll take a while, like I said, but I think this will be a very transformative year for QiML 2.0 or quantum inspired machine learning 2.0. And, as a researcher, just be advised, like if it's not an efficient process, it's not going to work out in the long term. So yeah, I mean, I've done software migration guides on this. You could see, so I have the biggest repository for medical quantum inspired machine learning, and there's a lot of stuff that's just technical and you could use for any field. That's on GitHub too. And I've gone through this, and like I said, even if you believe that all these other issues could get fixed, with quantum hardware, you still have the algorithm issue, and that's the main thing that they're supposed to run. So then you're trying to hope that there's something else better coming. But if you wrote it down on a piece of paper and said, these are all the issues, and like I said, I did kind of two guides. One's more a table, one's more like paragraphs. That you kind of see pretty clearly that this, for quantum computing, this will be the primary application. And so, and I hope that helped. And especially if you look at the top of these, I mentioned sensitive data. So you can't run sensitive data if there's too much noise. I mean, you could train a bunch of stuff, like, if there's, some noise, but like for inference and those types of things, you would never want to have noise, right? Any type of quantum noise or decoherence, that stuff going on. So, and I'm kind of curious, so does anybody have a question? So regarding your research, or what are your objectives, of using quantum inspired? And obviously this presentation is not like, kind of break news like, a bigger LLM or, all this stuff in big AI, but, potentially in 6 months, I think it will, right? It's the pace of innovation is fast. So, and you have to start with a working technology, right? So we're talking about CPUs, GPUs, TPUs around for a long while. It's working. And then on top of that, we don't have the other issues. And on top of that, we've already dequantized a bunch of algorithms. So it's I called it for the win, or it's basically game over for QiML 2.0. And I encourage everybody, go on your path. Like I said, I've done tons of these literature reviews, and this is kind of where I've settled with. And, as far as tensor network development, I know there's Julia. So Julia was in one of the papers, and there's a fair amount, but it's you really have to understand how they work if you're building your own, tensor network. So it's a little bit harder than like picking up a nice penny lane demo where you're just changing the learning rate. But there's different sites that kind of pull things together, but they tend not to be whole models. Let's just put it that way. So you kind of have to be coming from that background of you understand how to code in tensor networks. But it sounded like the Julia thing is a good thing because it takes all of these, they mentioned like, I don't know, 4 or 5 things that you have to do in tensor networks, and Julia does. I've mostly used Python, moving forward, but I would go all in with it. That's what other people are doing. There was a Penny Lane QHack event, and one of the researchers, he's from Multiverse, and he says we have like, a huge team of tensor networks, people working on it, and they came out with this compact if AI paper, which I've been featuring in this discussion. And I asked him some questions afterwards, and it was sounding more like secret sauce, like they don't give this away or whatever. I believe that any technology, it takes a while to get to the point where it's just like, okay, this works, the results are good enough, this is an industry. And I think tensor networks is getting there. So I would, everybody would prefer to put your code up. I think at this stage, I don't think you're going to see massive adoption. What is this? Like first half 2024 tensor networks. I could be wrong, but we're kind of approaching that area where yes, people are going to make it more proprietary, harder to understand, and harder to research and to build off of. Yeah. So, and Caden, and feel free to come on with your mic too. So Caden says, I came here to learn more. I hope that was achieved. I have a background and understanding in the classical machine learning. This is awesome. The quantum techniques are quite new to me. I only have a background in applied machine learning. Okay. So I will be waiting for packages to come out if I were to ever apply QiML. My primary background is pharmacy. So yeah, I it's very tempting because I researched a lot of medical quantum inspired 1.0 papers, and they taught me a lot about machine learning because I was still building up myself in that area. But the biggest papers tend to be the ones that are just the technical aspect. If it's medical at this stage, I haven't found a bunch of them that are awesome. So I wouldn't search necessarily for medical image, tensor network, those types of things. I would really find the big papers. There's a lot of big papers I'll put in the references to build off of, and then to use your own data set on. So it'll take a while, but if you're just searching for medical image or pharmaceutical drug design, that type of stuff, it's an industry. They say we're using pharmaceuticals like, what is this? Sandbox AQ, AstraZeneca, Sanofi, kind of biotech stuff, but they're not going to put the notebooks up. So I think it'd be good because there's probably coders that are going to listen to this, and I think it'd be good to put, the some models together that can be run, say MPS, a PEPS, tree tensor network inside of a classic classification model or something like that. That when you run it, then just like how in PennyLane you run it, you get a loss and you get accuracy. That would be good to start to see. So it is technical. So yeah, that would be the biggest suggestion. Don't just search for the medical quantum inspired, these types of papers. And feel free to elaborate, the quantum techniques being new to you, because they're quite common for me.
So
Yeah.
for me, currently the background that I have is I mainly know how to use the packages. I've only taken like the highest math that I have taken is up to Calc 3. Haven't taken linear algebra. Um, haven't taken anything past that, no number theory. So probably understanding like from the ground up, some of these technical papers is a little bit more difficult for me. Um,
Well,
so go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, there's good news is that a lot of this stuff like superpositioning, entanglement, quantum interference, these types of things, this is like if you were to have run on a quantum computer in the future. And I think that we're going to be seeing a lot less of that because that's more like, you have a quantum gate, which is in fact a matrix, it's just software basically. And, that's how people see quantum machine learning today. But like I said, there's complexities between tensor networks. And if you can find an effective guide, I would recommend that. Tensor networks 101, contractions, it's essentially like compressions, right? So you're essentially losing data in certain parts. And, convolutional neural networks tend to be more on the side of like it's not compressing, but it's, I forget the term of it, but anyways, it's doing certain things to be, efficient on classical hardware. So if you have that background classically, it's all in the papers, right? Because it hasn't had time to like fully infiltrate mainstream industry, and it's not at deep learning.ai. They might have some tensor networks. I'd have to check, But the point is I wouldn't get overly concerned about having to know everything quantumly, because that was more QiML 1.0. Okay, because that was intended to run, natively on quantum computers, and this is taking inspired measures of that, and you're going to wind up with classical algorithms. So for instance, the dequantized algorithms, these are classical only algorithms. There's no quantum left in it. They're sketched. It's called sketching. They're sketched to a traditional classical algorithm, and that's why they would run so well. But yeah, don't get overly concerned about having to know everything in quantum or quantum information science. And I would get more on the bandwagon of tensor networks. That's like, it seems to be 100% at this time, because there's just so many papers coming out. And like I said, for future medical or pharmacy, this is probably going to be an approved technique, either as a hybrid in that model, or doing it something like compressing that model, or helping it like an assistant.
Excellent. Thank you so much for giving me those resources to get started on my own.
Yeah. So it's more tools in your tool belt, because classical on its own is going to continue doing great. And this is a niche field to basically say, like, oh, we can do these quantum inspired. We found a killer application, such as, compressing neural nets or large language models. And we could do this better, or we could just substitute this part that we do quantum inspired for a different classical algorithm that's in ML workflow, because it's purely classical. So maybe a future optimizer loss function. I asked a question. There's a group in San Diego. It's advanced machine learning. You might like too. And I asked the question, which of these classical, these algorithms are inefficient for machine learning? And the host, his name's Ted, he said pretty much all of them. So I still can't quantify that, but it seems like there's room for growth coming from the quantum inspired method.
Okay.
Yeah, impact machine learning, or give alternates. That's that kind of stuff.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? So Dino or Sonu, just a quick hi is his appropriate too. Stick with it too, because that's my goal, is to do all this tensor network, dequantized algorithm, probably more so tensor network, the most efficient stuff, as opposed to the most like pure quantum where most people think of. So any other last questions or comments? And then thanks everybody for coming on. This has been Event Seminar 124, Thursday, February 29th, 2024, for all these FDA good machine learning practice guidelines and QiML 2.0. Have a good rest of the night and have a productive rest of the week. Take care, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.